The smell of antiseptic clung to me like a second skin, a ghost of the 14-hour shift I'd just survived in the ER. My feet ached, a deep, grinding pain that shot up my calves. All I wanted was to collapse onto my second-hand couch and not move until my alarm screamed at me tomorrow. My apartment, small and meticulously clean, was supposed to be my sanctuary. Tonight, it felt like a crime scene. It started with the note. Propped against the salt shaker on my tiny kitchen counter, written in my mother's looping, self-satisfied cursive on a piece of her monogrammed stationery. For your brother's wedding, he needs this more. My heart started a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs. I didn't understand. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd dropped off a check, a rare peace offering. But the crisp folded paper felt too light, too empty. My name is Alexis Burke. I'm 29 years old, and for the last 10 years, since the day I moved out for nursing school, my life has been a carefully constructed fortress against my family's expectations. While my older brother Roger was getting his MBA funded by my parents and coasting into a cushy marketing job, I was working 2 jobs to pay my tuition. While he was buying a new car every 3 years, I was driving a 15-year-old sedan. Every spare dollar, every overtime shift, every skipped vacation went into one place, my high-yield savings account. It was my escape fund, my future, my down payment on a small house where no one could ever tell me I wasn't enough. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the banking app. The loading circle spun for an eternity. Then the numbers appeared. Checking £407.32, savings £12.54. I stared, my brain refusing to process the information. It had to be a glitch. A mistake. I refreshed the page. The numbers stayed the same. I clicked on the savings account, my breath catching in my throat. There it was. A single massive withdrawal processed this morning. Amount $85,000. Description: wire transfer to F. Burke, $85,000. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the linoleum floor. The sound was distant, like it was happening in someone else's apartment. I slid down the kitchen cabinets, my legs giving out completely. A sound tore from my throat, a raw, strangled sob that was more pain than air. 10 years of my life. 10 years of 14-hour shifts, of eating instant noodles, of telling friends I couldn't afford to go out, of stitching up strangers while my own life felt like it was unravelling. All of it gone. Wiped out with a few clicks and a smug, dismissive note. My mother Francesca never approved of my choices. She saw my independence as an insult. My career as a trauma nurse was, in her words, unladylike and messy. My desire to own a home was a silly dream for a girl who should be focused on finding a husband. My brother, Roger, the golden child, was the family's real investment. At 32, he was finally getting married to his fiancée, Serenity, a woman who valued appearances as much as my mother did. Their wedding was to be a grand affair, a testament to the family's success, a success I had apparently just funded. My father, Jackson, would have just stood by and let it happen. He always did. His silence was his complicity. I lay on the cold floor for what felt like hours, the initial wave of grief leaving me hollowed out and empty. The tears stopped. The frantic, panicked energy receded, replaced by something else, something cold and sharp and eerily calm. I pushed myself up, my movements slow and deliberate. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights, the thousands of lives moving on, completely unaware that mine had just been detonated. They saw me as the difficult, bitter daughter, the one who was too serious, too focused on her little job to appreciate the importance of family. They thought they could take my future and I would just, cry? Yell? Eventually get over it and show up to the wedding with a forced smile and a toaster from their registry. They had always underestimated me. They saw my quiet determination as weakness. They saw my frugality as a lack of ambition. They took my money because, in their world, it was never really mine to begin with. It was just a resource to be redirected to the person who mattered more, the son. A slow, icy resolve settled in my bones. I picked up my phone from the floor. The screen wasn't even cracked. I looked at my mother's note again, the elegant script mocking me from the counter. He needs this more. I let out a short, humourless laugh. It was the first sound I'd made since the sob. I thought about my grandmother Audrey, the only one who ever saw me, the only one who believed in me. I thought about the last thing she ever gave me, something the rest of the family had laughed about at the will reading, something they'd dismissed as worthless. I whispered it aloud to the empty room, my voice steady and clear. You forgot one thing, Mum. One very big thing. The note stayed on the counter, a white flag of war I refused to touch. Sleep was impossible. The calm that had settled over me wasn't peace. It was the eerie silence before a storm. I spent the rest of the night sitting on my couch, the city lights blurring through the window as my mind replayed another scene, another moment of family humiliation. It was 5 years ago, in a stuffy lawyer's office after my grandmother Audrey's funeral. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and my mother's cloying perfume. My father Roger and I sat on one side of a polished mahogany table, while the lawyer read through Audrey's will. She'd left modest cash gifts to my parents and Roger. Then he got to me. And to my granddaughter, Alexis Burke, he'd read, peering over his spectacles. I leave my 2-acre parcel of land on Stillwater Road. Roger snickered into his hand. I saw my mother lean over to my father and whisper, "Poor girl, stuck with that useless swamp." She wasn't entirely wrong. The land was a strange inheritance. It was a scrubby, undeveloped lot adjacent to a protected wetland, overgrown with weeds and mosquitoes. Audrey had bought it decades ago for reasons she never fully explained, simply saying, "You never know what a piece of earth will be worth someday." To my family, it was a joke. A final, eccentric act from a woman they'd always considered a bit odd for encouraging my independence. They offered their pity, their condescending smirks confirming what they always believed, that even in death I was the one who got left with the scraps. I accepted the deed with quiet dignity, filed it away, and barely thought about it again. Until about 6 months ago. The calls started trickling in. Real estate agents, developers, men with confident voices who didn't seem to care that the land was, for all intents and purposes, a swamp. I ignored them. I was too busy working, too focused on my savings account, the tangible liquid asset that was supposed to be my ticket out. Now, that account was a hollowed out shell. The land was all I had left. I stood up, my joints cracking in protest, and walked to the small desk in the corner of my living room. I pulled out the file folder labelled Property. Inside was the deed, and a stack of business cards I kept from the more persistent callers. My finger traced the embossed logo on one of them, Dixon Development Group. Zander Dixon, CEO. He'd been the most relentless, calling once a week for the last month. My phone felt heavy in my hand. It was just after dawn, but I knew men like him were always working. I dialed the number. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and alert. "Zander Dixon." "Mr. Dixon, my name is Alexis Burke. You've been calling me about the property on Stillwater Road." There was a brief pause. I could almost hear the gears turning. "Miss Burke, I'm glad you called. I was beginning to think you weren't interested in making a substantial amount of money." "My circumstances have changed," I said, my voice flat. "I'm willing to meet." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown in an hour. I showered, the hot water doing nothing to warm the ice in my veins. I put on a crisp blouse and dark slacks, armour for the battle ahead. Zander Dixon was in his early 40s, with a tailored suit and an air of impatient energy. He had blueprints spread across the small table, and he wasted no time on pleasantries. "Ms. Burke," he began, tapping a manicured finger on the map. "We are in the final stages of approval for Wildridge Village. It's a $300 million mixed-use development. Luxury condos, retail space, the works. It's going to completely revitalise the area. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a formal offer. My eyes scanned the number, $150,000. 6 months ago, I would have fainted. It was more money than I'd ever seen. But it wasn't $85,000. It wasn't 10 years of my life. It wasn't justice. I looked at the number, then met his gaze without expression. I pushed the paper back toward him. No, thank you. He looked genuinely surprised. I assure you that is well above market value for undeveloped, non-buildable, wetland-adjacent land. It's a courtesy offer, really. We can easily build around you. Then you should build around me, I said, gathering my purse. Wait, he said, his confident tone faltering for the first time. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, let me be transparent. My surveyors made a mistake, a big one. We thought we had public road access through an old service lane. He pointed to a thin line on the blueprint. Turns out it was decommissioned by the county in the 80s. It's now part of the wetland preserve. We can't touch it. He took a pen and drew a circle around a small rectangular plot of land on the very edge of the sprawling development plan. A plot that was connected to the only public road for miles. My plot. The entire project hinges on that access point, he said, his voice low. Zoning, emergency vehicle access, utilities. It all has to come through your parcel. Without your 2 acres, Ms. Burke, Wildridge Village is just a pretty drawing. The whole $300 million project can't break ground. I looked at Xander Dixon, at the desperation blooming behind his professional mask, and felt nothing. No pity, no triumph, just the cold, clean click of a lock falling into place. The universe had just handed me a weapon, and it would be an insult to my grandmother's memory not to use it. My price, I said, my voice as level as a freshly paved road, is $850,000. He blinked. That's an absurd figure. It's 10 times the amount of a recent, unexpected financial loss I suffered, I replied, the words tasting like steel. Consider it a market correction. The price is non-negotiable. You have until noon to decide. After that, I'll start returning calls to your competitors. I stood up, my chair making a soft scraping sound on the floor. I didn't need to bluff. For the first time in my life, I held all the cards. His call came at 11:48 a.m. My lawyers will have a purchase agreement ready for your review by 3 p.m, he said, his voice strained. Who is your counsel? I didn't have one. I spent the next hour frantically searching online for the top-rated real estate attorney in the city, finally leaving a message with a man named Mark, whose website promised aggressive and swift representation. He called me back within 20 minutes, intrigued by the urgency in my voice. By the time Dixon's offer landed in his inbox, he was already on my side. We met in his glass-walled office the next day. Mark was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his 50s, who looked like he'd seen everything. He'd reviewed the contract. It's a solid offer, Alexis, he said, leaning back in his chair. Standard language, aside from the astronomical price for 2 acres of weeds. They're desperate. You can probably push for more. The price is fine, I said, but I have a condition. One that has to be in the contract, ironclad and non-negotiable. He raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. I want a performance clause, a specific one. The sale is contingent on the immediate start of the project. Groundbreaking, with heavy machinery, site clearing, the works, must begin on the property at 6 a.m. sharp. This Saturday. Mark stared at me, his pen hovering over his legal pad. This Saturday? As in 3 days from now? That's the one. And it has to be at 6 in the morning. That's an unusually specific and aggressive start time. Most townships have noise ordinances that start later. They'll need a special permit. Then Mr. Dixon's very expensive lawyer should get one, I said. He wants the land, he meets the terms, all of them. My life, once a marathon of saving and sacrificing, had become a sprint. I was no longer a victim of my family's theft. I was the architect of its consequences. Each day was a step in a meticulously planned campaign. Day 1, secure the deal. Day 2, formalize the terms. I ate, slept, and breathed the plan. When my mother called, I let it go to voicemail. Her message was syrupy sweet, asking if I was feeling better after my long shift, and reminding me about Roger's rehearsal dinner on Friday night. She didn't mention the money. Of course she didn't. In her mind, the transaction was closed. I spent my evenings not on Zillow looking at houses anymore, but on the county's public planning website. I found the event permits for the weekend. There it was. A noise variance permit for a wedding at the Lakeside Glass Ballroom, the venue right next to my property. The permit was valid from 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. on Saturday. Serenity and Roger's dream venue, the one they gushed about for months, the one my money was paying for. The pieces were all there. My land, their venue, my rage, their celebration, my grandmother's legacy, their entitlement. It was all about to collide. On Thursday afternoon, Mark called me. "It's done," he said, a note of disbelief in his voice. They agreed to everything. The price, the timeline, the 6 a.m. start. They even got the overnight permit from the county. Cost them a fortune in expediting fees, I'm sure. "The funds are in escrow and will be released to you the moment their equipment breaks ground," he paused. "I have to say, in 25 years of practicing law, I've never seen a developer move this fast or agree to such a bizarre stipulation." I felt a tremor of victory, cold and pure. "Thank you, Mark, for everything. Of course, just one last thing." He hesitated, and I could picture him frowning in his office. "The contract is signed. It's a done deal. But I have to ask you one more time, for my own peace of mind. Are you sure you want groundbreaking precisely on Saturday morning?" "I'm sure, Mark," I said, my voice unwavering. "Absolutely sure." The rehearsal dinner was held in a private room at an upscale restaurant, the kind of place with cloth napkins and tiny forks. I walked in feeling like an undercover agent, my simple black dress a stark contrast to the sea of pastel silks and crisp suits. The air was thick with forced laughter and the clinking of wine glasses. My mother Francesca spotted me immediately and descended, her face a mask of maternal concern. "Alexis, darling, we were so worried. You haven't been answering your phone." She kissed the air beside my cheek, her perfume suffocating. "I've been busy with work," I said, my tone neutral. She patted my arm, a gesture meant to look affectionate but feel dismissive. "Of course, dear. Well, we're all so glad you could make it. This wedding has been such a whirlwind, but it's all coming together perfectly. Thanks to everyone," she added, her eyes glittering with self-congratulation, "chipping in to help the happy couple." I just nodded, my silence a blank wall she couldn't penetrate. I found a seat at the far end of the long table, a solitary island in the boisterous family ocean. Serenity, Roger's fiancée, was holding court, her diamond engagement ring flashing as she gesticulated wildly, describing the floral arrangements for the ceremony. She was beautiful in a polished, generic way, like a catalogue model. "It's going to be magical," she cooed, looking directly at my mother. "An open-air ceremony by the lake, and then the reception in the glass ballroom. It's everything I've ever dreamed of." "We couldn't have done it without you, Francesca." My brother, Roger, beamed beside her, his arm draped possessively around her shoulders. He looked happy, oblivious, and utterly punchable. He caught my eye and gave me a little wave, the kind you give a distant acquaintance. Later, as people mingled, he made his way over to me, a glass of champagne in his hand. "Hey, Lex, glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said dryly. "Listen," he said, leaning in conspiratorially. "I know things have been tense with you and Mum, but thanks for being a good sport about all this." He gestured vaguely around the opulent room. "It means a lot to me. To Serenity." "A good sport," I repeated, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "Right." I wondered what he thought I was being a good sport about. My stolen future. The casual, brutal way my family had erased a decade of my work. He had no idea. He saw a family squabble, a bit of drama. He didn't see the grand larceny that I'd paid for his canapes. The evening wore on. When it was time for the family photo, I was shuffled to the very edge, half hidden behind a towering floral arrangement. As the photographer yelled for everyone to smile, I watched Serenity whisper something to her mother. She glanced in my direction, her perfectly glossed lips twisting into a sneer for a fraction of a second before morphing back into a radiant smile for the camera. I felt a familiar pang of isolation, the quiet ache of being the family footnote. As the dinner wound down, I was making my escape when a voice called my name. It was Tori, Serenity's younger sister. She was a few years younger than me, quieter than her sister, with observant eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Can I talk to you for a second?" she asked, pulling me toward a quiet alcove near the restrooms. She looked uncomfortable, chewing on her lower lip. "What's up, Tori?" "Look, I probably shouldn't be telling you this," she started, her voice low. "But I heard Serenity talking to your mum a few weeks ago about the money for the wedding." My entire body went rigid. "Your mum was hesitant at first, about taking it without asking you. She was worried you'd be upset." I let out a bitter, silent laugh. A fleeting moment of conscience. It hadn't lasted long. "It was Serenity," Tori continued, looking me straight in the eye. She convinced her. "She told your mum that you'd never agree if they asked. She said you were selfish and that you'd just waste the money on yourself, on some silly little house, instead of contributing to something important, like Roger's happiness." The words hit me harder than the drained bank account. It wasn't just a theft born of my mother's warped sense of familial duty. It was a calculated, malicious act, painted with the brush of my own supposed selfishness. They hadn't just taken my money. They had assassinated my character to justify it. "Thank you for telling me, Tori," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. She gave me a small, sympathetic smile. "I just thought you should know." As I walked out into the cool night air, the last shred of doubt I might have had about my plan evaporated. This wasn't just about getting my money back. This was about holding up a mirror to their ugliness. And the reflection was going to be blinding. The next day, Friday, was the calm before the storm. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Instead of going to work, I drove out to Stillwater Road, to the land no one had wanted. I parked my car on the gravel shoulder and walked onto the property for the last time. The weeds were thick and tall, buzzing with insects. The air smelled of damp earth and wild green things. It wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense, not like the manicured lawns of my parents' neighbourhood or the pristine lakeside view of the wedding venue next door, but it was real. It was mine. I walked to the far corner of the lot, the spot closest to the road, where the first bite of the bulldozer's blade would fall. This small patch of earth was the last tangible piece of my grandmother Audrey I had left. She was the only person who had ever looked at me and not seen a problem to be solved or a disappointment to be managed. She saw a person. She had fostered my independence, celebrated my nursing school acceptance, and slipped me $20 bills with a conspiratorial wink, whispering, "For your escape fund." She knew, long before I did, that I would need one. Leaving me this land wasn't an accident or an afterthought. It was a final lesson. She was teaching me that value isn't always obvious. Sometimes, the most powerful assets are the ones everyone else overlooks. My family had laughed at this useless swamp. They would not be laughing tomorrow. From my purse, I pulled out a small, worn photograph. It was of me and Audrey, taken on this very spot nearly 20 years ago. I was about 10, with missing front teeth and scraped knees, grinning proudly. Audrey stood beside me, her arm around my shoulders, her face crinkled in a warm, genuine smile. We looked happy. We looked free. I knelt in the dirt and dug a small hole with my hands. I placed the photograph inside, a final offering to the memory of the woman who had armed me for this fight without ever knowing it. I covered it back up, patting the soil down firmly. It was a symbolic burial. I was letting go of the little girl who craved her family's approval, who hoped that one day they would finally see her. She was gone. The bulldozers could have her. Standing up, I brushed the dirt from my hands and took one last look around. I was no longer a victim seeking revenge. Revenge was too messy, too emotional. This was simpler. This was a business transaction, a rebalancing of accounts. They had made a withdrawal from my life, and I was about to make a deposit back into my own, with interest. I pulled out my phone and found the number for the site manager from Dixon Development, a man named Dave who had called earlier to confirm the logistics. I sent him a simple text. Confirming 6 a.m, start for tomorrow, no delays. His reply came a minute later. Copy that, Ms. Burke. Crew is ready. See you in the morning. I wouldn't be there, of course. I had a front row seat reserved somewhere much more comfortable. As I got back in my car, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. My mother. I let it go to voicemail, my finger hovering over the delete button before a morbid curiosity made me listen. Her voice was clipped, all business, the syrupy sweetness from the rehearsal dinner gone. Alexis, it's me. I'm at the venue with Serenity doing a final walkthrough, and the woman from the rental company is asking about the veil. You were supposed to pick it up from the seamstress. It's the last thing on the list. Can you please just do this one thing and bring it to the bridal suite tomorrow morning? Honestly, it's the only thing you've done for this family lately. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. The veil. The symbol of bridal purity and family tradition. They wanted me to deliver the final touch to the perfect wedding they had stolen from me to create. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I texted my mother back, my thumbs moving with precise, deliberate taps. Can't. I have a prior commitment, a very important financial meeting I can't miss. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine rumbling to life. The sound was a promise, a prelude to the symphony of chaos that was about to begin. At 5:45 a.m. on Saturday, I was sitting in a small, all-night cafe about a half-mile down the road from the lakeside glass ballroom. From my window seat, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the entrance to Stillwater Road. The sky was beginning to lighten from inky black to a soft, bruised purple. I ordered a black coffee and a croissant I had no intention of eating. My stomach was a tight knot of anticipation. At 5:52 a.m, the first truck arrived. A massive flatbed carrying a yellow bulldozer, its metal treads gleaming under the streetlights. It was followed by an excavator, then a fleet of dump trucks, their engines a low, guttural rumble in the pre-dawn quiet. They lined up on the shoulder, a metal army awaiting its orders. I checked the time on my phone. 5:59 a.m. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. It was scalding hot, but I barely felt it. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank. A wire transfer of $850,000 from Dixon Development Group has been successfully deposited into your account. The clock ticked over to 6 a.m. The world erupted. The synchronized roar of a dozen diesel engines shattered the morning stillness. It was a violent, grinding, mechanical scream that vibrated through the floor of the cafe and up my spine. Headlights cut through the dim light as the bulldozer lumbered off its trailer and onto my land, its heavy blade lowering like a guillotine. The ground shook as it took its first hungry bite of earth, tearing through weeds and soil, the sound of ripping roots and crunching rock echoing across the lake. Jackhammers started their percussive, deafening assault on a rocky outcrop near the road. This was not quiet, polite construction. This was a blitzkrieg. Dixon was on a tight schedule, and he was wasting no time. I watched, my expression serene, as my phone began to light up. The first call was from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, then another, and another. Panicked bridesmaids, I presumed, or frantic wedding planners. Then came the call I was waiting for. Roger. I answered, holding the phone slightly away from my ear. Alexis? What the hell is going on? He screamed over the cacophony. There's construction, right next to the venue. It's shaking the whole building. Is it? I asked, taking another calm sip of coffee. That's a shame. A shame? Serenity is having a complete meltdown. The florist is here and the vibrations are knocking petals off the centerpieces. We can't even hear ourselves think. You have to do something. I'm not sure what you expect me to do, Roger. It's not my property anymore. The line was silent for a moment, save for the thunderous backdrop of the excavator. What are you talking about? I sold it, I said simply. To the developers building Wild Ridge Village. The deal closed this morning. I could hear a woman shrieking in the background. Serenity, no doubt. Her dream of a magical, serene lakeside ceremony was being pulverized by a jackhammer. You sold the swamp, Roger stammered, the pieces slowly, painfully clicking into place in his privileged, oblivious mind. You did this? On my wedding day? Why? You should ask Mom, I said, my voice as cold as the grave of my savings account. She knows exactly why. I hung up. The final call came a few minutes later. Francesca. Her voice was a low, furious hiss. What did you do? I merely facilitated a real estate transaction, Mother. It's called capitalism. I thought you and Dad were fans. You did this to ruin your brother's wedding. After everything we've done for him, for this family. Let's be very clear, I said, my calm finally cracking to reveal the granite beneath. You didn't do this for the family. You did it for yourselves. You stole my future to pay for a party. You took 10 years of my life so Serenity could have better floral arrangements. You didn't think I'd fight back. That was your mistake. You thought the land was worthless, just like you always thought I was. Turns out you were wrong about both. I watched as a dump truck laden with the soil that once held my grandmother's picture rumbled past the cafe. For the first time in weeks, a genuine, unrestrained smile spread across my face. Enjoy the wedding, I said, and ended the call. I didn't go to the ceremony. I spent the morning at a dealership, trading in my 15-year-old sedan and paying cash for a safe, reliable, brand new SUV. Then I went to an open house for a condo downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and put in a full-price offer, my bank app showing the beautiful, irrefutable proof of funds. I was rebuilding my life, brick by digital brick, while the foundations of their fantasy were being systematically demolished. Around 3 p.m, my phone buzzed with a text from Tori. It's a disaster. You're a legend. A string of texts followed, a real-time report from the front lines. The noise was relentless. The wedding planner had quit. Half the guests had left before the appetizers were served, complaining of headaches. The officiant had to shout the vows, which were rendered meaningless when Serenity, her face a mask of tear-streaked rage, stopped him mid-sentence. She screamed at Roger right there at the altar, Tori wrote, in front of everyone. Said he was a spineless mama's boy who couldn't even protect her on her wedding day. My heart didn't flutter with joy. It was a quiet, sombre satisfaction, like a surgeon confirming a terminal diagnosis they'd long suspected. The final, glorious text came an hour later. She gave the ring back, told him she was never in love with him. She was in love with what a wedding like this was supposed to give her. Then she stormed out. I decided to make an appearance at the reception. It felt necessary, like visiting a gravesite. I walked into the lakeside glass ballroom to a scene of utter devastation. The room, which should have been filled with music and dancing, was a hollow, echoing cavern of failure. A few bewildered family members picked at the melting ice sculpture. The 5-tier cake sat untouched, leaning slightly to one side as if in defeat. Vendors were packing up, arguing with my father, who looked pale and shrunken. My mother was sitting at a table alone, staring into space, her perfect matriarchal facade shattered. Roger was standing by the bar, his tuxedo jacket off, his tie loosened. He looked completely broken. The golden boy had lost his shine. For the first time, he was facing a consequence he couldn't charm his way out of. He saw me, and his face hardened. "Are you happy now?" he spat, his voice thick with a mixture of anger and self-pity. "You ruined everything." "I didn't ruin anything, Roger," I said calmly. "I just collected a debt. This party," I gestured to the empty room, "was built on a lie, and lies, like poorly constructed buildings, tend to collapse." Tori appeared at my side, a glass of champagne in her hand. She gave Roger a look of profound disappointment. "For what it's worth," she said to him, "Alexis didn't have to warn you, but she did. She sent your mother a text last night telling her she had a very important financial meeting this morning. She gave you a chance to ask what that meant. You were all just too arrogant to listen." My mother must have seen the text and dismissed it as another one of my selfish excuses, another refusal to participate. The warning was there, hidden in plain sight. I walked to the head table where 2 untouched glasses of champagne were still sitting at the bride and groom's empty place settings. I picked one up. The bubbles were mostly gone. I held it aloft, my voice carrying through the quiet, mournful room. "A toast," I said. My parents and the few remaining guests turned to look at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and hostility. "To my grandmother, Audrey." I looked directly at my mother, whose eyes were now filled with a dawning, horrified understanding. "She was a wise woman," I continued, my voice clear and steady. "She knew what was worthless and what never was." I took a small sip of the flat champagne, the taste bitter and satisfying. I set the glass down with a soft click, turned, and walked out of the wreckage of their perfect day, leaving them to sift through the expensive, self-inflicted rubble. A few weeks after the wedding that wasn't, I stood in the middle of my new living room. The keys felt solid and real in my hand, a stark contrast to the digital numbers that had once represented my future. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the empty space. It was quiet. It was mine. The silence wasn't lonely, it was peaceful, the sound of a life bought and paid for by my own resilience. Down below, the city hummed along, oblivious. From my vantage point, I could just see the distant silhouette of the cranes over Wild Ridge Village. The skeleton of a new community was rising from the land my family had deemed worthless, a towering monument to their miscalculation. I hadn't spoken to my mother or Roger since the reception. There was nothing left to say. The bridges weren't just burned. The ground they were built on had been excavated and hauled away in a fleet of dump trucks. A few days ago, a letter had arrived from my father. It was the first time he'd ever reached out to me on his own. His handwriting was shaky, unfamiliar. It was a short, rambling apology, full of excuses about wanting to keep the peace and not knowing how to stand up to my mother. He asked for my forgiveness. I read it, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer. It was an acknowledgement of his failure, but it wasn't an absolution I was ready, or even willing to give. Some things once broken don't get fixed. Tonight was my housewarming party, though it felt more like a life-warming one. A few friends from the hospital were coming, the people who had seen me exhausted and burned out but never broken. Tori was coming too. We discovered a shared, dry sense of humour and a mutual appreciation for calling things what they were. As I set out glasses, I thought about the word karma. It wasn't some mystical force. It was just cause and effect. They said I'd never own anything, that I'd waste my money on myself. They were right, in a way. I never would have owned this place if they hadn't pushed me to the absolute edge. I never would have sold the land. I would have kept my head down, saved my money, and bought a small, sensible house, always feeling like I had to justify its existence. They forced my hand, and in doing so, they gave me back my life, magnified. I took back what was mine, and then some. The doorbell rang, and soon the quiet apartment was filled with warm voices and laughter. It felt good. Normal. Later in the evening, as I was showing a friend the view from the balcony, I saw a familiar face near the doorway. It was Julius, my ex-boyfriend from college. We hadn't spoken in years, not since a messy breakup that had involved his inability to commit and my inability to pretend I didn't care. He looked older, more polished, holding a bottle of wine like an entry ticket. He caught my eye and made his way over, a charming, practiced smile on his face. "Alexis? Wow, this place is incredible." "Julius," I said, my tone polite but cool, "what are you doing here?" "My cousin is friends with one of your ER buddies. When I heard it was your party, I had to stop by. I heard what you pulled with your family and that land deal," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "That was badass." I looked at him, at the calculated admiration in his eyes. "He wasn't here because he missed me. He was here because I was no longer the struggling nursing student. I was a success story, a headline, an asset. He was drawn to the power, not the person. It was the same transactional attraction that had fueled my family's greed, just packaged differently. I gave him a small, knowing smile. The old me, the girl who craved approval, might have been flattered. She might have seen this as a second chance. But she was buried under a ton of construction dust on Stillwater Road. Funny how people show up when you own things, I said, my gaze sweeping over my new home, my friends, my life. Especially your story.